One of my friends is here from a coffee shop I usually study and work on my sermons. And I met her a few months ago, and because she would come into the coffee shop, and every time she comes into the coffee shop, she leaves with a new friend. Like, she meets like new people and just a friendly person. So she's here today. I'm really excited to see Kathy here. If you see any other visitors, you are a welcome guest. And members here, if you see anyone new, just get to know them. And welcome to Ina Road Church of Christ. Thank you for choosing to worship Jesus with us today. Now, yesterday there was a wedding. Some of you will remember Skip and Katie. They had a daughter named Alyssa. She asked me to marry her to Jacob. And so yesterday was a wedding, and she comes down the aisle with her father, Skip, and I'm trying to be in the moment with everyone else. They get down right to the front, the music turns off, and then I forgot, like, I'm supposed to be in charge of it right from that point on, and I'm just like caught in the moment, and I couldn't remember. I was supposed to say, who gives this woman to this man? All I could remember was, who, and then I had to look at my clipboard. Thankfully, that was right in front of me, and it's like, oh, okay, who gives this woman to this man? But I was just caught in the moment, and today what I want us to ask is, who put Joseph in Egypt? Now, how many of you do not know the story of Joseph? How many? All right, we got 1, 2, 3. All right, 4. Okay. It is one of my favorite Old Testament stories, and I'm not going to get to do it justice. It deserves your own attention and read. It's in the book of Genesis. And but what happens is there's a young man named Joseph who has other brothers, but his father loves Joseph more than all his other brothers. In fact, his father treats him with favoritism and gives him a coat of many colors. And his father doesn't give that coat to all of his brothers, just Joseph. Now, we don't know exactly what the coat looked like, but I suspect it looks like this, okay? And so God gives Joseph this coat of many colors, which makes his brothers even more jealous and upset. And then on top of that, Joseph starts getting dreams from God, where God is telling him in the future, you're going to be in a great position, and your own family will bow down and worship, you know, at your feet. And so Joseph starts telling his brothers and his family that, and then that just makes his brothers even more dislikes him, and they end up throwing him into a pit. And then while he's in the pit, they start contemplating whether or not they should kill their brother. All right? Now, some people talk about the Bible being boring, but I grew up with a children's picture Bible, and this was the picture in my Bible. Okay? This could give you nightmares as a kid. Okay? So if you think the Bible's boring, you need to get yourself a children's picture Bible, and you will not be bored or think it's boring, because this is the picture I looked at as a little kid, all right? His brothers throw him into this well, and while he's in the well, they're contemplating, should we kill him or not? They come to the conclusion, you know what, we could make some money by selling him as a slave, and then we'll take his coat of many colors, dip it in animal's blood, and act like he was attacked by a lion or some beast, and convince Dad that way. So that's what they decide to do. They sell him as a slave. He goes to Egypt, and he works for a guy named Potiphar. Now, Potiphar's wife is attracted to Joseph and wants to have an affair with Joseph, and Joseph refrains and stops it from happening multiple times. Finally, she ends up accusing Joseph of making advances at her, and Potiphar hears it and puts Joseph in prison. It's in prison that Joseph meets two guys who used to work for the king of Egypt, okay, the king of the known world. And they both have dreams, and they want someone to interpret their dreams. And Joseph tells them about his God and how his God can interpret these dreams. And he interprets both of their dreams perfectly. Perfectly. One guy gets out of prison, like the dream says, and the guy tells Joseph, I'll remember you. I'll remember you. Well, 2 years goes by, and he forgot about Joseph. But the king of Egypt has a dream, and he wants it interpreted. And so he's wondering who can interpret this. And then the guy who was in prison with Joseph says, oh my goodness, I forgot Joseph. I know a guy who can interpret your dream. His name is Joseph, and he's in prison right now. But he's your guy. So the king of Egypt pulls Joseph out of prison and asks him to interpret the dream. And Joseph gives credit to God, saying, God can interpret this dream. He interprets it perfectly. And the king says, who else could we find that has the Spirit of God and has this wisdom? And the king of Egypt puts Joseph at his right hand, makes him basically the second king of the known world, the highest in command, only next to the king himself. All right, and so Joseph is in charge of the kingdom. And so that's what happens in the story of Joseph. That's the gist of it, okay? Joseph was put in that well and put in prison, and if you were put in a well or put into prison and you did not deserve it, how would you feel? Angry? What else? Sad? Upset? What's that?
Vengeful.
Vengeful, okay. Would you be offended at all? Right? But what I want us to think about today is, well, who put Joseph in Egypt? Was it his brothers? Who was it? All right. Hugh Grant was at a gas station, and a guy came up to him and said, hey, you look a lot like that Hugh Grant guy. No offense. It's like, you look like that actor that is ugly. No offense. Like, how can you not be offended by that? But offense is something that is in our culture, it is so easy to get offended. And this is what it's like. If you're trying not to offend a soul on the internet, not a soul that you're talking to, this is what it looks like, trying not to offend someone, okay? She's tiptoeing through the internet, trying not to post something that will offend someone. All right. Now, before we get into offense and offending, and I need to point out this, that Jesus offended people. He offended his own followers. He offended his own hometown. He offended the religious leaders of the day. Okay. Jesus did offend someone, and if you have breath in you, chances are you're going to offend someone at some point. It's just going to happen. But at the same time, Jesus didn't go around saying, who could I offend today? He never had that thought. Who can I get angry and offend? He never, ever had that aim of offending people. His only aim was to hear what the Father wanted him to say and to say what the Father wanted him to say. And he said it the way the Father wanted him to say it. And sometimes it offended people, but Jesus never in his heart looked forward to offending people. He only said what the Father told him to say. And we know this because in Matthew 17, he tells Peter, but so that we may not cause offense. See, that's his intent. He doesn't want to cause offense. All right? But sometimes when you're telling the truth, people will get offended. Now, this is a porcupine, and a lot of people think that porcupines shoot out their quills, but they don't shoot their quills. They can't do that. What they do is when they get offensive, when they get defensive, when they get scared, muscles in their back tighten up, and then these quills go up. And what is it called again? Well, yeah, the porcupine. Okay, the porcupine will actually back up into you and whack you with its tail, and that's how people get hurt by them. But if you can imagine, there's people who we can't control what they say about us and what they do towards us. They're like these porcupines, all right? And the worst thing about getting attacked by a porcupine is actually not the first blow. It's what happens afterwards if you don't do anything about it. Because if you get hit by these quills and you don't take care of them right away, they will actually start to go deeper and deeper into you and cause infection. So you got to take care of it right away. There are some times where you're going about your day and people will say something that just irks you. It makes you so angry. I can't believe she said that. I can't believe he said that to me. And if you don't take care of that quill, it will start to bury farther and farther and cause you to have a bitter heart. This dog represents you and I, not taking care of our quills, not taking care of the things that people have said to us or done to us. And that's going to cause major, major infection. It's going to cause us to not behave the way Christ wants us to. We got to take care of these things. Now, I've been wanting to do this sermon on offense for a while because months and months ago, I saw one of my relatives get offended, and it was ugly. And I was like, oh, man, do I look like that? Because I'm related to this person. And I'm like, oh, man. I know I get offended. I know everyone gets offended. How do we deal with this? Because I know what I don't want. I don't want to behave like an offended person starts behaving. And if you've ever been around someone who's offended, you know that their behavior starts to change. They look at the person different. Like my relative was like looking at the person that offended them differently, just like eyeing them. And then sometimes we start talking differently too. We start using shorter words and quick, almost like we're in this attack mode, but we're acting like we're not really hurt, but we're really hurt. Like, I'm fine. And so our words are saying, I'm fine, but our face is saying, I'm hurt. That quill is still in me, and it's getting infected. All right? So how do you know if you've been offended? Well, let's say this guy offends you, okay? And you, instead of taking care of that quill, instead of forgiving him, you just kind of let it bury in, and now it's infecting you. And so months go by, you think it's all done because you haven't run into this person, but you run into someone who looks like the guy that offended you. And all of a sudden, you start feeling a certain way because this guy looks like the guy who offended you. That's how you know that you still have some offense. You still got some stuff you got to work on that is infected. Maybe you are chopping some food, and the food looks like the guy that has offended you, okay? And you start feeling a certain way, all right? It's like, I can't believe that guy said that to me. I can't even look at Top Ramen the same way anymore, okay? Now, in Proverbs 17 and verse 9, it says this, whoever would foster love covers over an offense, but whoever repeats the matter separates close friends. If you want to foster love in your relationships, then we have to be good at covering offense. That doesn't mean we pretend it didn't happen and we act like we're not hurt. That's not dealing with the offense. The way to cover an offense is to first go to Jesus and say, Jesus, I've been hurt. Help me. And a lot of times, Jesus will give you a new perspective to where you don't even have to go and talk to the person because of that new perspective. You're like, I'm not even hurt anymore. I can totally see it from their point of view. I am not hurt. I'm not offended. I don't even need to go and talk to that person because Jesus gave me another perspective. I love how Proverbs chapter 17, verse 9 says it in the CEV, Contemporary English Version. It says, you will keep your friends if you forgive them, but you will lose your friends if you keep talking about what they did wrong. Such practical advice. You think it's just common sense, but yet we need to hear this. If we want to keep our friends and be good friends, we have to learn to forgive them and not hold grudges. And remember that one time you said that to me, and hold it over their head and remind them of it. Forget about it. Lay it to rest. So who put Joseph in Egypt? That's the question. All right, if you asked me this a few years ago, I'd say definitely his brothers. Definitely his brothers did that. But look at what Psalms 105, verse 16 says. He, talking about God in the context, God called down famine on the land and destroyed all their supplies of food, and he sent a man before them, Joseph, sold as a slave. According to this psalm writer, from his perspective, who sent Joseph to Egypt? God. All right. I think Joseph might have something to say about this, though. Joseph himself, what's his perspective? Well, when his brothers find out that the brother that they, threw into a pit contemplated killing and then sold into slavery, is now basically the king of Egypt, or right up there next to the king of Egypt with all that power, they begin to panic. Oh my goodness, our brother is going to get revenge. Our brother is going to get us back. And so their hearts begin to fill with fear. They're worried about what Joseph is going to do. And this is how Joseph responds to them. Genesis chapter 45, verse 5. And now do not be distressed, and do not be angry with yourselves. Look at the grace in this conversation. Do not be angry with yourselves for selling me here, because it was to save lives that God sent me ahead of you. For 2 years now there has been a famine in the land, and for the next 5 years there will be no plowing and reaping. But God sent me ahead of you to preserve for you a remnant on earth, and to save your lives by a great deliverance. So then it was not you who sent me here, but God. He made me father to Pharaoh, lord of his entire household, and ruler of all Egypt. Who sent Joseph to Egypt? God. God did this. Today's message is called Chosen, because a lot of times we can, in our faith, we can struggle with this idea of, okay, God allowed something bad to happen. God allowed it. And as our faith gets stronger, we start saying, okay, yes, God did allow that terrible tragedy to happen in our lives, but I'm starting to see the good that's coming from it. And so God allowed it, but he's now turning it into something good. But there's another perspective, and that is God chose it and chose you for it. And that takes your faith to a whole other level. It wasn't God allowed Joseph to be thrown into a pit and then lied about and put into prison. It was God chose Joseph for that position, and then that position, and then that position that would lead him to the ultimate position. And when we start saying, wait a minute, God chose it, then how am I supposed to be faithful in the meantime? How am I supposed to be giving him credit and glory in the meantime? Because it hurts to be offended. My own brother's offending me. My own brother saying that stuff about me. But if God chose it, you can count that God is going to use it for something really good. But you have to continue to trust him while you're in the pit and while you're in the prison. A couple weeks ago, I was listening to a sermon on a run, and this part of the sermon stood out to me, so I found it, and I wanted you to hear this clip. Now, this is Pastor Greg Groeschel, and he's preaching to his congregation and talking about his daughter, Mandy, who is diagnosed with an illness, and it's a strange illness and giving her lots of problems, and they've been struggling with it for a while. And so this is him talking about his daughter.
So I was talking to Mandy, my daughter, and I said, I'm so proud of you. I'm so proud. I know that when God allowed this, when I said the word allowed, she kind of tensed up, and I just kept talking. I said, I know that God allowed this in your life, but the way you're enduring it honors God. Your faith is so strong, and you're enduring with such integrity. She said, Dad, I just have to stop you. Your theology is off. Oh, it is, young one. Correct my theology, sweetheart. Okay? She says, Dad. She said, I don't say God is allowing this in my life. She said, do you see the difference that I'm able to make in so many people's lives? Like literally, she's ministering to thousands of people online through this. As she's hurting daily, she's ministering. She said, no, I believe God chose me for this because he knew that he could be glorified through it.
So his daughter realized, no, God isn't allowing this. God's choosing me for this. He chose me to be put in this position, and look at how he's using it to minister to thousands of people. She posts videos on YouTube talking about what's going on, and people are being ministered through her pain. Her pain has become her platform. Her platform has become the thing that honors God. And she sees that, and she says, wow, I've been chosen. That takes faith to a whole other level than just, I'm a victim. But as long as you're a victim, no one will ever really truly follow. Because we don't follow victims, we follow people who get back up after they go into a pit. who get back up after they go to a prison, who get back up after they're hit by some kind of illness. So in the past, I've read the book of Job and thought, okay, God allowed Satan to attack Job, all right? But now, as I think about what I've been learning in this sermon, is it's also true, and maybe even a greater perspective, to say God chose Job to teach Satan a lesson. Because if you remember at the beginning of the book of Job, there's this confrontation between God and Satan. And Satan makes the accusation, God, you do not know humans like I know humans. I know humans better than you do. And God says, have you considered Job? I choose Job. I choose Job to teach you, Satan, a lesson. That while you think you know humans better than their creator, you're going to find out I know Job better than you. A person's steps, Proverbs chapter 20, verse 24, a person's steps are directed by the Lord. How then can anyone understand their own way? Now, when things are going great in our life, it's easy to read that and say, yes, my steps are directed by the Lord. I'm protected, I'm blessed, everything's going great. When this verse is tested in our lives is when we take some steps, we get bad diagnosis, someone says something rude to us, someone cuts us off, someone hurts us, and now we're starting to wonder, God, are you really directing my steps? Because I've been offended by a whole bunch of people. I've been offended. So are you really directing my life? It's hard to believe that when you're thrown into a well and thrown into prison for things you didn't deserve. The very first full-length animated movie was Snow White and the Seven Dwarfs. And what's incredible about this movie is that Disney artists had to draw over 1 million drawings to complete that motion picture. Over 1 million drawings went in to creating that full-length motion picture. And every second you're watching that show, every second there is 24 drawings being flipped in front of your eyes. 24 drawings being flipped for every second. That means for every second, every moment you're enjoying it in real time, there was an artist behind the scenes going into work 8 hours a day drawing 24 drawings for every second. As we live life in real time, it's easy to forget that there was a God who thought about you and I before he even created everything, and he had millions, and if not billions or trillions of thoughts going into every second of our lives. There is a God who's working behind the scenes that has thought everything through. That's how he knows the end from the beginning, because he already knows how it all works out. There was a guy who he loved watching football and his favorite team, and he would listen to it live on the radio on his way home from work because he wanted to hear how it went. But then when he got home, he would watch it on TV because they would show the TV version later on. And because he had already heard it on his ride home, while he's watching it and his team fumbles the ball or doesn't do well, he says, that's all right, I already know who wins. God already knows who wins. God already knows the end from the very beginning, and he has already directed our steps. Our job is to walk in faith. All right, you said all these promises, God. I don't know how you're going to work them out, but I'm going to walk in faith that you have directed my steps. Oh, if you want to see that, there we go. Proverbs 19, verse 11 says, "It is to one's glory to overlook an offense." It is actually to our glory to look at someone who has offended us and say, you know what? Jesus, please help me to forgive. Help me get that other perspective that makes me not tighten up or let this quill infect my heart with bitterness. Let me forgive that person. A few months ago, I got a phone call from someone, and they left a voice message, and I picked it up, and I was listening to it, and they talked for a little while, and then they thought they hung up. It was still on. And someone else apparently was around them, and they started talking bad about me, and it was recording. And I was like, oh my goodness, they don't know it's recording, and I have it on my phone. And so it hurt. It definitely hurt, because when they thought they were being recorded, they talked a certain way, like they're on my side, but when it stopped recording, you could hear them talking to someone else as though they're not on my side. And so it was just kind of, and I love this person, and I respect this person, but it hurt. And so I have the voice message. I'm just joking. I'm not going to play it. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. All right? I had to do something, though, because I was offended. I was hurt. I was offended. What I did was I went to Jesus in prayer. I said, Jesus, this hurts. This hurts. And Jesus gave me some perspective. Jesus gave me some great perspective. He pointed out to me that this person was hurt because someone they love has just died. And when I got that perspective, I was like, okay, I understand. They're speaking from a heart of pain. So they're hurt. Now, I've already thought this through. After the service, there's probably maybe going to be several people coming up like, was it me? Which is terrible, because it must be more than one person talking bad behind my back. But if that's the case, I forgive you, okay? I forgive you. You don't need to come up to me and ask if it was you. I forgive you through the strength of Jesus, because I can't do it by myself. Jesus is the one who helps me get over offenses, helps me forgive when it hurts. Ecclesiastes chapter 7, verse 21 says, don't pay attention to everything people say. You may hear your servant insulting you because they thought the voice message was done, right? Okay, verse 22, and you know yourselves that you have insulted other people many times. This is where God gives us some other perspective. Like, do you really want to be hypercritical of them talking bad about you when you do the very same sin? You've talked bad about other people behind their backs too. Do you really want to bring all that judgment and condemnation towards them? Because if you do, you're shooting yourself in the foot. All that is coming your way too. It's better to stop the cycle, forgive. In Luke chapter 9, verse 5, Jesus said, if people do not welcome you, because he's sending them off to preach the gospel, and sometimes people hear the truth, they get offended. If people do not welcome you, leave their town and shake the dust off your feet. He says you need to move on. Jesus was ahead of his time, right? Taylor Swift said, shake it off. Jesus says, shake it off, all right? All right, Jesus, you're telling us to shake it off, to move on. All right, that's all good in theory, but what does it look like? Jesus gives us he's the role model. Luke chapter 4, verse 28 says, all the people in the synagogue were furious when they heard this. He just got through preaching a message. They got up, drove him out of the town, and took him to the brow of the hill on which the town was built in order to throw him off the cliff. I imagine if Jesus was actually married, he'd come home and she'd say, how did the sermon go, honey? And he'd say, it was a cliffhanger, you know. What a terrible, terrible experience. They wanted to throw him off a cliff, but this is where it gets powerful. But he walked right through the crowd and went on his way. He did not stop and say, do you know who you're picking up right now? I am the creator. I've come in the flesh right now, but I created you. I could send 10,000 angels. I could wipe you out right now. How dare you pick me up and try to throw me off this cliff that I already created? Do you know who you're picking up right now? But he doesn't do that. It is to one's glory to overlook an offense. In Isaiah 44, verse 22, it says, I have swept away your offenses. This is God speaking. I have swept away your offenses. And God knows every offense we've ever done and all the ones we don't even know we've done. Like a cloud, your sins, like the morning mist. Okay, I've swept them away. Return to me, for I have redeemed you. When we're struggling to forgive people, when we're struggling to give them forgiveness, it's often because we have forgotten the great debt that we have been forgiven. So I want you to just remind yourself of how gracious God has been to you in your own life and all of your shortcomings, so that you soak up that grace, that love, so you have that kind of grace and that kind of love and that kind of mercy and that kind of forgiveness to give to the one that has offended you. We have been forgiven much, and it's up to us to forgive much through his strength. And now even a greater question than who put Joseph in Egypt is who put Jesus on the cross. For centuries, people debated saying, oh, we blame the Romans for putting Jesus on the cross. Others say, we blame the Jews for handing them over to the Romans to put Jesus on the cross. But the truth is, the Father chose Jesus. And Jesus, looking at the Father's will, says, oh, no one's making me do this. I'm laying down my life of my own choosing. God did not allow the cross to happen. God chose the cross to happen. And here's where our faith is challenged. What if God chooses you and I to go through something where people offend us, where people will say things and do things that hurt us, but it's for the good of a whole bunch of other people? Will we be able to say, God, thank you for choosing me, and just help me get through this. Help me to give you as much glory as I can, as you have put me in this position. Use it for your glory, and I believe in your goodness. Even while I'm in the pit, even while I'm in prison, even while people are offending me, I believe you are good, and you can make good come out of this ugly circumstance. Can you take your faith to that level? I believe you can in Jesus' name.